Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of you for your testimony today and for your work to protect the homeland. Of course, American banks are heavily regulated in the bank secrecy arena. CTRs and SARs have been referred to you. Talk to me a little bit about the Middle East, North African arrangements and the international banks that are not Western European, Far East, or American on what they do in the money laundering regime in that regard, the equivalent of a Bank Secrecy Act and reporting regime.
The requirements, part of the strength of this effort, and it's important to note, is that it's international in scope. And so it's not just what Congressman Green was talking about in terms of the UN system, but you do have these international norms and principles that are adopted by the Financial Action Task Force, leveraged by the IMF, World Bank, Interpol, and the UN. And so you do have these standards of anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing, anti-proliferation finance, which are the heart of the international system. So everyone is supposed to be playing by those rules. The challenge is, of course, you have different levels of capacity. But interestingly, the private sector, which has been at the forefront of this, has been pressured to put in place the kinds of anti-money laundering systems and sanctions screening processes that adhere to law. Are very sensitive not just to their own jurisdictions, but to what the U.S. Treasury and what Western banking capitals demand. Why? Because they need the connectivity for correspondent banking purposes. They have to plug back into that system. And so not just their own governments, but these Western banks are now demanding to know and to be assured that their systems actually work, that they know their customers, that they can screen transactions, that they can implement the OFAC sanctions from Treasury, even in the heart of Africa. And so that is really a good news story, and it's part of the structure. The difficulty is not all jurisdictions and not all banks are in the same place, and we have to lift all boats to the same level of compliance. That's a hard thing to do.
Mr. Jones talked about targeting financial targets as a part of our espionage operation, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. I mean, when you referenced that a trade was made with $13 billion of gold, by my quick calculations, that's about 338 tons of gold. So I'm curious, you know, how that got transported, assuming it's not just done through a customs receipt.
I think that comment came from Mr. Shannon.
If you both maybe address it, talking about do we set an expectation in special ops, for example, that they are given, you know, a mission of looking for opportunity on the financial side as opposed to a security threat? So maybe Dr. Sheshanzer go first on the gold question, then go to Mr. Jones on that.
Sure, Congressman Hill, the $13 billion that I mentioned was actually over 2 years. There were transactions that were taking place between Turkey and Iran, where the Iranians were selling oil and the Turks were sending back gold. They had found a loophole in the sanctions system that enabled them to do this as long as the gold was not destined to the government of Iran, but rather to individuals. And so what they were doing is literally taking gold that was coming out of the bazaar in Istanbul, melting it down into bricks and sending them back one shipment at a time, and doing that over the course of 2 years. Now, as it happens, Congress caught wind of that and shut down what we're now calling the golden loophole. What was remarkable to me about that was that we actually gave it a 6-month burn before it was actually put in place. So for an additional 6 months, and this is still inexplicable to me, this trade was allowed to continue, and the Iranians and Turks were allowed to continue to settle up. And so in total, it ended up being $13 billion, but those, whatever it was, 338 tons that you mentioned, that took place over many airplane shipments over the course of 2 years.
On the targeting, I mean, here's my general sense, and I was in the Yemen region recently. My strong sense, the focus of our efforts, just to use the Yemen example as one case in point, the focus of our efforts in Yemen right now are primarily targeting al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula operatives. That includes our strikes. That includes some of the limited training that we've done, not on the financial side. So if we take the Al-Mukalla Bank that was raided, about $350,000, but we've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars raided by other bank accounts. Some of that was kept in warehouses. I mean, my sense is the focus of our efforts are not going to target to finding these locations and raiding them. They are targeting individuals from the ideological committees, from the military committees of al-Qaeda, and not the financial committees. And I would say that needs to be a major priority. Let me just say on the other banking question that Juan answered, we have had very good cases of organizations and banks like Kabul Bank, which have been used for terrorism financing, for money laundering. But I think, and I saw President Ghani when he was here recently, he has been willing to look a lot more carefully at banking efforts and the use of Kabul Bank for that. So I think getting allies in place and leveraging their interest and willingness to do that is helpful. And I would highlight the Kabul Bank case as a positive news story.
Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Chairman.